Hey, welcome back to Lurk Channel. I'm going to be talking about one of the most embarrassing aspects of speedrunning, which is leaderboards, and the problem of leaderboards. Which is basically that they suck. They aren't the lens through which we should be viewing speedruns, but they also aren't going anywhere, because they naturally exist. This video is aimed more at people who already do speedruns, but I'll give a really brief overview of what speedruns and what leaderboards are, talk about why they suck, how speedrun.com interacts with that, what lens we probably should be focusing on in terms of speedrunning, how there is no overall speedrun community, there's only individual communities and what effect that has on leaderboards, how Discord and Reddit have been annihilating forums and IRC and how that was bad for knowledge of the runs, and then we'll get into what I think we should do in the future. So first let's get to that brief overview. So speedrunning is playing a video game with a timer while accomplishing some sort of goal. This can be any percent where you're just trying to complete the game as fast as possible, or say 100% where you're trying to complete all of the goals within the game while still beating it as fast as possible. Leaderboards exist because if one person has a time and another person has a time, and we can say that the two runs are comparable, then naturally we have a leaderboard, even if they're tied for first place. Even if there's no spreadsheet to show it, there's still going to be somebody who has a faster time. This is where some of the joke used to come from, where we'd say, this isn't a world record, this is the best known run time with video verification, all these like qualifiers that aren't just, a simple world record, because, there could easily be somebody who's done a much faster run of the video game that you're purporting to be world record, just there's no video evidence of it. And this is kind of why leaderboards suck, because if we're going to say that two runs are comparable, and explain why one is faster, then we're going to have to come up with some set of standards, right? And some of these cut across all of speedrunning, when to start and stop your timer, whether or not you allow turbo controllers, watching an intro cutscene, using one control over another, whether you allow emulation, whether you allow new patches or not. And sometimes it even comes down to, did anybody actually time this part of the route? There's a lot that goes on into the comparisons, right? But ultimately, speedrunning is an honor system. We kind of trust that people are doing comparable things. There are plenty of examples of speedrunners cheating, like Exo and Meat Boy, Dream in Minecraft, or Lee in Yoshi's Island, but this is not really common behavior, especially the more obscure you get in a game. And so as things become more rigid, and if you're a new runner and you're coming into the game and you're just kind of given a route, instead of discovering the run and why it is the way it is, you basically get that explanation from somebody on Discord. New runners are introduced to this really rigid understanding of the run, and they might even lack understanding about why the run does what it does. That's just the route. That's just what you do. And this problem is amplified a bit because they probably found the game on speedrun.com. So now let's talk about speedrun.com a little bit. Speedrun.com is kind of a mediocre website, and ever since Elo took it over, it definitely runs better, but it still needs support because it still has problems that began when Pack first started it. So Pack is somebody who started speedrun.com because Speedruns Live couldn't get their leaderboards going. And he kind of stated that he was inspired by our lovely Jewish questioning dirtbag, our White Goose, so really off to a great start. So he brought on board the SRL people to come and help see the dream come true from IRC discussions that they had facilitated, like the one where I was told to go die in a fire because we were going to be stealing somebody's time and putting it on a website, even though we weren't going to host their run or any of the video files. It was like, you can't steal my time. Like, cool, dude. So Pack got leaderboards going, and the great spreadsheet replacement took place, with only a few leaderboards that already had their own websites like Dear Tier and whatever else sticking to their own devices, but for the most part it was kind of cool, If you were an early adopter into speedrun.com, then it means that you were probably able to get moderator for a certain leaderboard, and you were probably the only runner of that game for a little bit. I had a couple games like that, like Batman for the Game Boy. And so at first this was cool, it's a nice way to archive runs, and then ads were introduced. Now, they weren't as intrusive as they are now, because if you were logged in, then you wouldn't see the ads, and so it was this discreet, kind of advertisement stuff going on. But it seems like once the site got up and once those advertisements took place, nothing really happened for a couple of years. The forums that they had didn't even have, like, direct messages. Everything seems like it was being built in-house, so it's not like they just threw up a PHP BB or something and called it a day. I say this with no knowledge of how speedrun.com operates from the inside, but from my understanding is that they decided to make everything on their own, which exacerbated a lot of functionality that a lot of forums just typically have. And at some point, then Pack did try to expand and try to do stuff. He teamed up with the Global Speedrun Association, and they tried doing a live event for competitive speedrunning and stuff like that. Not something I was ever really interested in. They did hire some site moderators at some point. Again, nothing I was really interested in. And then Pack sold speedrun.com to Elo. This is a company that runs a lot of other websites. They're all called some form of buff. So they have Dota Buff, Overbuff, Track Dota, Valor Buff, Fort Buff, and Artabuff, all of which are sites for other video games, Dota, Overwatch, Valorant, Fortnite, for ways in which you can build your characters or, tips and tricks, these sorts of things. And so Elo, as a corporate entity, came in, and they've already gone through one website owner, from my understanding, and they've introduced some of the following things. So, better site loading, the website runs better, more advertisements. Advertisements now show up even for logged-in users. There's more donation perks, fancy names, and whatever else, colors and stuff. A worse layout. It was harder for people to get to the certain parts of the leaderboard that they actually wanted to get to. They added comments to runs that you couldn't initially moderate, which is a little weird, and I don't even know why runs needed comments, but sure. And then lastly, the most recent thing that they've done is added a supporter program, sort of like an in-house Patreon, for an ad-free experience, and some other things like you're able to boost games or share it with 3 other runners or something like that, and that's on a monthly basis. So, in many ways, Elo has done quite a bit, actually, and they probably don't get the credit that they deserve for making the site run better, but the site still sucks in the ways that it did under Pack. And so a lot of the people who are already kind of mad and resistant to speedrun.com see everything that Elo Buff has done as only a negative, because they already weren't really using the website, and now the website has just gotten more advertisements, seemingly, so they can just kind of point at that and go, yeah, see, look, it's worse. Now it's even, now it's bad. Because at least under Pack, when he was making money off the ad revenue, at least it was discreet. It was behind the scenes for people who were just looking up runs and didn't have accounts, right? So now when new runners are going, and speedrun.com is a very large website at this point, new runners seem to really care about where they are on the leaderboard, and they want all of their runs verified because of the SRC data that's collected. They'll even wait an entire year instead of reaching out to you on Discord or Twitter to get you removed as a mod for a game that nobody cares about so that they can get their run verified. Shoutouts to Batman for Game Boy. There's also just inaccuracies on the site that they have no way of combating because everything is done by individual communities. Like, apparently I am the world record holder for Castlevania Chronicles Any%, despite it actually being Zaspat, who deleted his account. Leaderboards are, again, an honor system, and despite the standards and everything, we're still trusting each other. This is something that speedrun.com has gotten right, because everything is run by individual communities, as I just said. But the problem is the lens through which new runners especially are looking at it. It's no longer about the game. When I got into speedrunning, there was no popular video games except for Super Mario 64, and you could only really base that on viewers that it got on Twitch. The appeal was about what you could do in a game that was faster. Bunny hopping, for example, zipping in like a Mega Man, going out of bounds, moving faster than you were supposed to be able to, duplicating items. These things were what really interested me. And so while some of these can be done across games, it was mostly game specific. You were into a certain game, and then you looked into what could be done as a speedrun for it. And some games were really not good as a speedrun, and some that you didn't expect were really good speedruns, And now I think some of this, has changed because the lens through which new runners now see speedruns is through the leaderboard. It seems important and also scary to them because that's how they found the run, whereas before it was more of a discovery process. They were interested in a certain game and then they went to go look for it. Whereas I think now people look at speedrun.com and they'll look at who, what's the most active game, which game has the most runners, which one has the most viewers on Twitch. That's what I'm going to go for. Oh my God, what do you mean first place is, under an hour or whatever? That seems really intimidating. And so a lot of new runners will be okay with getting like a third place or a fourth place, depending on how popular the game is, and sort of saying, that's good enough. They spent a couple months, they'll do that, they'll accomplish that, and then they're done. They'll move on to a different game, or they'll just quit speedrunning because they've gotten their place. Again, this is inevitable. For people who stream full-time and do speedruns, they're often variety streamers, or Super Mario 64 runners primarily, right? There's very few streamers who make a living purely off of speedrun content, if any. Speedrunning might have jump-started their channels, but it's now incidental variety. It's not their main content anymore. I think good examples of this are like Distortion, Elijaz, I Ate Your Pie, Cerno TV, XQC when he's running Minecraft, these sorts of things. And so I think seeing things through that lens, now people are again satisfied with sort of a good enough run in the context of a leaderboard, instead of it being kind of a passion project because they were so into a certain game. Now, if people are lucky, if those new runners are lucky, what they'll do is look through it as that lens, find the community through speedrun.com, and then they'll be able to join the individual community where they'll actually have a chance of getting into that discovery process that was initially the appeal to speedrunning for folks like myself who started in 2013. And that's because there is no speedrun community. There's only individual communities. And this is one of the big problems that speedrun.com has, because they're only a middleman to other communities. They don't actually have their own communities themselves. There is no speedrun.com community. And so as much as speedrun.com wants to be the main hub of the speedrunning community, it just simply doesn't work that way. It's a lot of smaller communities or genre groups, Puzzle General, anime speedruns, these sorts of groups that sort of depend on a core, group of runners who really put in the work and the care about the video game or the genre, or because it's just really popular. Super Mario 64 is an easy example of that. These communities do their own thing. They set their own rules, they accept runs to whatever leaderboard they facilitate, and generally, the more people involved, the more accessible the run is to new runners. And speedrun.com doesn't really have a good way to join these communities together. There's a lot of conversation about the site itself and a lot of Minecraft drama, but, there isn't too much going on speedrun.com itself. And this is something that PAC tried to overcome with the Global Speedrun Association, but it just didn't really work. So the main benefit of a leaderboard is that you can see what the top run is and compare that to others. But what is lost is that general knowledge of why the run is the way it is. It's more like a news headline. People don't actually read the article. They just see the world record time and go, oh, cool. Whereas for me, I don't care what the world record time really is. That number is arbitrary. What I care about is that there's progress being made. The time is going lower because people are discovering new things. And we used to have forums to sort of document this type of thing, but instead we've had Discord and Reddit annihilating forums and IRC, which was bad. Speed Demo's archive was actually really cool, especially their forums. Maybe not the submission part and the earlier VHS tape stuff, that was kind of rough, but the forums itself is solid. Speedrun.com forum doesn't really seem to have the same knowledge hub the way that SDA had, if you can even find the right sub-forum, because good lord, there's so many forums. And I think a lot of those discussions are actually happening on Discords. And Discord, while it does have threads and, that you can kind of offer, some way to search up stuff, it's not the same as a forum where you'd have a running thread about one game and people were adding on information to games. I remember I even had a thread on the SDA forums about Stargate for Super Nintendo, a game that nobody has run since, as far as I know. But I was the only one looking into it, and then I got to the part where there was this really random boss that you had to hit with grenades, and I was just kind of like, I'm not feeling this, so I didn't pursue it. But all of that information is contained in the thread for anybody to go back and look at. Can't really do the same thing with Discord, and Reddit isn't the same either, because that's kind of a news headline aggregate for streamers and world record. You're not getting... Maybe you'll get the new discovery in the really popular game that shows up there as a clip, but you're not getting a thread that people are going to go back to learn the run from. And so the only way to really get help is to get you to the individual community members who will actually know the run. So where do we go from here? What I think most people should do is ignore the leaderboards and achieve faster times while being honest about what you're doing and what you're using to do those runs, so that anybody else who wants to compete with you or wants to do the same run has something to compare against. While leaderboards are naturally going to exist, they just shouldn't be the focus. World record is arbitrary. It's just a final time, but pushing times lower is not. That is progress, that's innovation, that's better execution, or better luck. Speedrunning is an honor system. You need to be honest about what you're doing so that anybody can figure it out, even if you're 6th place on a leaderboard. I think speedrun.com needs to make a pivot to something that builds a community. Maybe they could be like social media for speedrunning. Another interesting idea that came out of a conversation with me and some other marathon organizers was the idea of seasonal leaderboards for all games, something that individual communities could get behind and sort of support the site of speedrun.com in facilitating. Think of SRL seasons, but as just a running leaderboard for each year or each month, or maybe that could be determined by the community as to how often the season goes for. I also think speedrun.com needs to build trust. There's a lot of people who have vitriolic thoughts towards speedrun.com just in general, and I don't think it has a lot to do with ELO or the supporter tier, even the ads or the comments or even the behind the scenes updates. This isn't what speedrun.com users are really looking for. Speedrunners in general need to want to support the content that speedrun.com has as sort of a mainstream hub for people outside of speedrunning. And we need to decide as sort of a community, which is difficult since we're not a large community that is cohesive. Like I said, we're a bunch of individual communities, but we need to decide, is speedrun.com something that's good for speedrunning and that we want to support? What can the site do on its own to become its own community that can help facilitate speedrunning in a way that either helps them better connect people to those individual communities or sets itself up so that leaderboards become more accessible instead of this big, scary thing for new runners to look at and be satisfied with like a 3rd place time. Thanks for listening if you made it this far. I appreciate any comments or thoughts that people might have, as this is a pretty complicated conversation, and I don't know that I've really covered all the bases, but this is just some of my thoughts, as a lot of the news that I was seeing about the release of Supporter from speedrun.com was purely negative, and my reaction to it was not in a totally negative way, but I also understand why it was negatively received. That was my first reaction, was, oh, there are going to be people who don't like this, and I was definitely right. Thanks for watching Lurk Channel. Alright, I'll see you next time.